Hey, welcome back. My beautiful outcasts, my rejected royals, my misunderstood masterpieces. You, yes, you. The one who learned how to stay quiet in rooms that misunderstood your depth. The one who was measured by how easy you were to deal with, not by how powerful you actually were. The one who kept being told, directly or indirectly, that you were a lot too sensitive, too intense, simply because you felt things fully and refused to fake what didn't feel real. You were doubted early, not because you lacked value, but because your value wasn't loud. You didn't announce yourself with noise. You didn't push your way into relevance. You listened, you observed. You gave people space to reveal who they were, and somehow, in a world addicted to performance, that calm awareness made people uncomfortable. They tested you subtly, quiet little tests disguised as jokes, delays, half-effort, disappearing acts. They wanted to see how much you would tolerate, how long you would stay kind when things felt uneven, how much of yourself you would shrink just to keep the connection alive. And for a while, you did, not because you were weak, but because you believed in people longer than they believed in themselves. You gave grace where boundaries were needed. You offered understanding where accountability should have existed. You showed loyalty in places that only deserved distance. And because you didn't explode, because you didn't dramatize your pain, because you didn't demand attention for your hurt, they assumed you would always be there, available, adjustable, forgiving on demand. That was their mistake, because while they were mistaking your patience for permission, you were learning. While they were comfortable benefiting from your presence, you were quietly noticing patterns. While they thought they had you figured out, you were outgrowing the version of yourself that needed to be understood by them at all. They didn't ask you who you were, they asked around. They looked for confirmation elsewhere. They wanted reassurance that you were replaceable, manageable, nothing special. And what did they hear? The same thing. Over and over again, from different mouths, in different rooms from people who had nothing to gain by exaggeration. They heard that you were rare. They heard that you were solid. They heard that you were the kind of person who elevates spaces without trying. They heard that you were someone you don't mishandle. And still, they ignored it, not because the truth wasn't clear, but because respecting your value would have required them to rise, and they weren't ready for that. It's easier to dismiss what challenges you than to become someone who can hold it, so they took your accessibility for granted. They treated your presence like it had an unlimited supply. They assumed silence meant safety. They assumed kindness meant weakness. They assumed loyalty meant permanence. They assumed wrong, because one day, without an announcement, without a dramatic exit, without a long explanation, you pulled back. Not to punish, not to manipulate, not to be seen. You pulled back because something inside you finally aligned. You realized that staying where you were tolerated, but not valued, was costing you more than leaving ever could. You didn't beg them to choose you. You didn't chase clarity from confusion. You didn't fight to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You chose dignity, and that choice confused them more than any argument ever could. Your silence wasn't empty. It was full of reflection, full of boundaries forming quietly in places where guilt used to live. Full of self-respect settling in, steady and unshakable. You didn't disappear, you recalibrated. And that's when the narrative shifted. They started to notice the absence, not because they missed you deeply at first, but because the energy changed. Rooms felt different, conversations felt flatter. The version of themselves that felt bigger around you suddenly had nothing to lean on. And slowly, uncomfortably, the regret started echoing. They watched from a distance, quietly, carefully, trying to understand how you were still standing so composed, how you didn't collapse without them, how you didn't reach out to fix what they broke, how your life didn't pause just because they were no longer centered in it. Your growth didn't shout, it showed in your posture, in your restraint, in the way you stopped over-explaining, in the way your no became calm instead of apologetic. You didn't glow because you were trying to prove something. You glowed because you were no longer leaking energy into places that couldn't hold it. And that glow became proof. Proof that you were never too much. Proof that you were simply too real for people who preferred convenience over connection. Proof that the version of you they benefited from was not the best version of you. It was just the most accessible one. Now they tell stories, safer ones, versions, where the ending feels mutual, where the loss feels less sharp, where they didn't really lose you, you just grew apart. But the truth has weight, and it doesn't disappear just because it's uncomfortable. The truth is, they had access to something rare and treated it like it was renewable. They didn't lose you because you changed. They lost you because you finally stopped changing yourself to be digestible. They didn't walk away because you weren't enough. They stepped back because they felt your self-respect growing, and it reflected everything they weren't ready to face. You didn't become distant. You became selective. You didn't become cold. You became clear. You didn't become arrogant. You became anchored. And now, from the outside, they watch. They notice how people speak your name differently, how your presence is respected without you asking for it, how you no longer need to convince anyone of your worth, how your life feels intentional, not performative. They feel the missed opportunity in quiet moments, in late realizations, in the echo of conversations where your name comes up and the room goes still for half a sec. That pause says everything. Because you were the standard, you always were. And the hardest part for them isn't that you're doing well. It's that you're doing well without needing to explain yourself, without reopening doors, without revisiting old dynamics, without offering access to a version of you that no longer exists. You didn't burn bridges. You outgrew them. You didn't seek revenge. You chose peace. You didn't demand recognition. You embodied it. And this isn't the end of the story, not yet. This is just the point where the power quietly shifts, where you stop wondering if you were ever enough and start realizing how much they lost by not seeing you clearly when they had the chance. So stay here, stay grounded, stay aligned, because what's unfolding now isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about you continuing to rise, calm, intentional, and completely aware of who you are becoming. You stayed longer than you should have. You know that now. You stayed because you saw potential where there was inconsistency. You stayed because you believed effort could replace awareness, and patience could fix what accountability never touched. You stayed because your heart has a habit of investing fully before it asks whether the ground is solid, and for a long time you blamed yourself for that. You wondered if your loyalty was a flaw, if your depth was the problem, if loving sincerely in a world that treats connection like a transaction made you naive. But here's the truth that took time to settle into your bones. Your mistake was never caring too much. Your mistake was offering premium access to people who only knew how to consume, never how to contribute. They mistook your openness for obligation, your forgiveness for permission, your silence for acceptance, and every time you adjusted yourself to keep things smooth, they adjusted their behavior just enough to keep benefiting, not enough to grow, not enough to change, just enough to keep you hopeful. Hope is powerful and dangerous, especially when it's one-sided. You noticed it first, in the smallest ways, the way your messages were answered slower once they felt secure, the way your efforts became expected instead of appreciated, the way your needs were acknowledged but never prioritized. You felt the imbalance long before you admitted it. Your body knew before your mind caught up. That quiet tension in your chest wasn't anxiety. It was discernment trying to get your attention. Still, you stayed. You explained. You softened your language. You gave the benefit of the doubt more times than logic could justify. Because you don't abandon easily, you don't leave at the first sign of discomfort. You try, you repair, you hold space. And that's beautiful, when it's mutual. But it wasn't. They were comfortable letting you carry the emotional weight of the connection, comfortable letting you be the understanding one, the flexible one, the one who could handle it. And because you could, they never asked whether you should. What they never realized is that people like you don't break loudly, you don't explode or threaten or create scenes. You withdraw, slowly, thoughtfully, with a clarity that arrives fully formed. Not impulsive when you leave. It's not because you stopped caring. It's because you finally started listening to yourself. The moment you stopped over-explaining was the moment the dynamic began to collapse. At first, they didn't notice. They assumed it was temporary, a phase, a mood. They expected you to return to your role, the one who checks in first, the one who smooths things over, the one who absorbs discomfort, so others don't have to feel it. But you didn't. You stayed quiet, not passive, intentional. And silence does something interesting when it's rooted in self-respect. It forces people to confront the absence of what they took for granted. It removes the buffer. It takes away the emotional cushion they relied on without acknowledging. Your absence wasn't dramatic, but it was loud in all the ways that matter. That's when the questions started. Not to you, but about you, they asked around, because they needed reassurance. They needed to believe their version of events. They needed someone to tell them they didn't mishandle you, that losing access to you wasn't a loss at all. And instead, they heard the same thing again. That you were solid, that you were genuine, that you were rare. They heard it from people who had nothing to gain by flattering you, from people who noticed the consistency, the integrity, the way you show up even when it's inconvenient. And that rattled them more than your silence ever could. Because it's one thing to dismiss someone privately. It's another to realize the world sees what you ignored. That's when discomfort turned into defensiveness. They minimized, they reframed. They told softer versions of the story where they didn't come out looking careless, where your distance was mutual, where you were just on different paths. Anything to avoid sitting with the truth that you didn't leave because you outgrew them. You left because you finally saw the dynamic clearly. You didn't announce your growth, you embodied it. Your energy changed. You stopped responding out of obligation. You stopped offering emotional labor without reciprocity. You stopped filling silences that weren't yours to fix. And without saying a word, you communicated something they weren't prepared to hear. Access to you is earned, not assumed. That shift unsettled them. People who rely on your availability feel exposed when it disappears. People who benefit from your patience feel threatened when it expires, not because you've become unkind, but because you've become unavailable to patterns that drain you. And you noticed something else during this phase, how much lighter you felt, how your thoughts became clearer when you weren't constantly managing other people's emotions, how your energy returned once you stopped negotiating your boundaries internally. You realized how much of yourself you had been giving away just to maintain harmony. Peace doesn't require performance, and the moment you stopped performing, your nervous system finally relaxed. They noticed that too. Your calm wasn't the fragile calm of someone avoiding conflict. It was grounded, stable, self-contained. You weren't trying to prove a point. You weren't trying to be seen. You were simply no longer available for confusion. And that kind of calm feels intimidating to people who are used to controlling narratives. So they watched you move forward without bitterness, watched you refuse to engage in subtle games, watched you decline invitations that no longer aligned, watched you choose solitude over proximity that felt hollow. And the more composed you became, the less their old assumptions fit. They expected regret. They expected you to circle back. They expected an explanation. What they got instead was consistency, quiet, steady, undeniable. Your growth wasn't flashy, it was structural. You rebuilt your inner world. You questioned why you tolerated what you did. You learned the difference between empathy and self-erasure. You started choosing relationships that felt mutual instead of familiar. You learned that connection without respect is just proximity. And as you changed, so did the way people reacted to you. Some admired it quietly, some felt inspired, some felt exposed. Because when someone stops accepting less, it highlights who was offering less all along. They missed the version of you that made things easy for them. Not because that version was happier, but because that version didn't challenge their comfort. They didn't miss you. They missed access. And you finally saw the difference. That realization didn't harden you. It refined you. You became more intentional, more selective, more protective of your energy without becoming closed off. You learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're filters. Not everyone gets to walk beside you anymore. Not everyone gets your inner world. And that's not punishment, that's discernment. Your absence became a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable for people who avoid reflection. They began to notice how often your name came up without you being present, how your impact lingered even after you stepped back, how your consistency spoke louder than any explanation ever could. You didn't need to defend your character. Time did it for you. That's the quiet power of integrity. It doesn't argue. It accumulates. You're not the same person you were when you first entered those spaces, and that's not loss. That's evolution. You didn't abandon who you were. You honored them by refusing to keep them in environments that diminished them. And this is only the middle of the story. Because now, you're standing in a place of clarity that changes everything. You see patterns faster. You trust your instincts sooner. You no longer mistake potential for promise. And the more grounded you become, the more obvious it is who never had the capacity to meet you where you were headed. You're no longer explaining your worth. You're no longer auditioning for space. You're no longer negotiating your needs to seem easier to keep. And that shift, quiet, steady, irreversible, is exactly why the story doesn't end here. And now you understand something that once felt impossible to name. You were never abandoned because you lacked value. You were released because your value outgrew the containers people tried to keep you in. What fell away wasn't love. It was access without responsibility. It was closeness without care. It was familiarity mistaken for connection. You didn't lose anything essential. You reclaimed yourself. There's a quiet confidence that settles in when you stop needing to be chosen. Not arrogance, not defensiveness, just certainty. You wake up knowing you no longer need to explain your depth to people who only swim on the surface. You no longer need to prove your intentions to those committed to misunderstanding you. You move slower now, but stronger, softer in tone, sharper in awareness. And people feel that shift before you ever speak. Your presence carries weight because it's no longer trying to earn approval. It's anchored, self-sourced calm in a way that doesn't ask permission. That kind of energy unsettles those who benefited from your old availability, not because you're doing anything to them, but because you stopped doing things for them. They notice how you don't rush anymore, how you don't fill silence just to ease tension, how you don't reach for validation when rooms grow quiet. You let things be. You let people reveal themselves, and in that stillness, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Some will say you've changed. They're right, but not in the way they mean it. You didn't become colder. You became clearer. You didn't become distant. You became selective. You didn't lose your compassion. You learned where it belongs. You stopped trying to be understood by people who never listened. You stopped watering connections that were already dead. You stopped offering the best of yourself to situations that only took. And something remarkable happened in that space you created. Your life expanded. You made room for alignment, for relationships that feel mutual instead of draining, for conversations that don't require translation, for peace that doesn't come at the cost of your self-respect. You discovered that being alone can feel fuller than being surrounded by the wrong energy. The ones who lost access feel it now, not loudly, quietly, in moments they didn't expect. When your name comes up and the room pauses, when they see you thriving without explanation, when they realize you didn't fall apart the way they assumed you would. You didn't spiral, you didn't beg, you didn't chase closure, you simply continued. That's what unsettles them most. Not your success, not your glow, but your stability, the way you carried yourself with dignity, even when things ended without answers, the way you chose growth over noise, the way you let your absence say what arguments never could. You became proof that peace is power. And you know it now deeply in your body, in the way you breathe easier, in the way your boundaries feel natural instead of forced, in the way you trust yourself without needing reassurance. You're not afraid of being misunderstood anymore, because you finally understand yourself. You see clearly who belongs and who doesn't, who meets you in honesty and who only shows up when it's convenient. And instead of trying to change anyone, you adjust your access calmly, decisively. That's the evolution. You were never meant to be everywhere. You were meant to be aligned. You were never meant to be liked by everyone. You were meant to be respected by yourself. And now you are. The story didn't end with rejection. It refined you. It taught you discernment. It taught you that rarity doesn't need to announce itself. It reveals itself over time. And those who failed to recognize it must now live with watching from the outside. You're not waiting to be chosen anymore. You are choosing. And that choice, quiet, steady, unshakable, is what changes everything.